My father spent an entire Father's Day dinner bragging about the daughter he always deserved, while looking right at my stepsister. He had no idea that while he was airbrushing me out of the family photo, I was busy exercising a nuclear clause in our company's contract that would cost him $3.2 million. He wanted a new family. Fine, but he's going to have to buy out the old one first. My name is Jordan Vance. I'm 32 years old, and exactly 2 hours ago, I sat in a high-back leather chair in a skyscraper downtown and signed a piece of paper that is going to cost my father every single thing he has spent the last 40 years building. He doesn't know yet, not even a clue. Right now, he is probably standing in front of his master bedroom mirror, adjusting the silk tie Cynthia bought him, rehearsing a speech he spent all night writing on a yellow legal pad. Downstairs, 25 of our closest family members are gathered around a massive mahogany table. It's decorated with the good china and those overpriced, vanilla-scented candles that my stepmother, Cynthia, picked out specifically to set a wholesome mood. My dad has a massive announcement tonight. He's got a framed certificate hidden in his office. He's prepared a declaration. He's expecting happy tears and a standing ovation. I already know exactly what he's going to say, word for word. I know because I found his handwritten notes sitting on his desk 4 days ago. And what he wrote about, finally finding the daughter he always deserved, is the exact reason I drove to a lawyer's office this afternoon and put my legal signature on 3 specific documents that will dismantle this family's legacy forever. But here is what none of them realize as they sip their expensive wine. The speech isn't even the worst part. What comes after the speech, what arrives in a certified white envelope 9 days from now, is something my father cannot undo, no matter how much he begs. And he's going to have exactly 90 days to figure out how to pay me my share or watch his empire crumble. Welcome back to Real Reddit Revenge, the home of the most satisfying stories where family secrets explode and quiet decisions change the game. If you're new here, drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss a chance to see a bully get their due. Now, let's get into the heavy stuff. When I was 8 years old, my father took me to a massive construction site on Highway 9 in his old, beat-up pickup truck. It was a Saturday morning, early enough that the sun was just peeking over the trees, and the morning dew was still thick on the grass. He lifted me up with his calloused hands, sat me on a stack of industrial plywood, and pointed at a massive steel I-beam running across the ceiling of a half-finished luxury home. "You see that beam, Geordie?" he said, looking at me with what I thought was pride. "That is the spine. That is what holds the weight of the entire world up. Without that one piece of steel, this whole house falls into a pile of toothpicks. That is what you are going to be for this family someday." I believed him. I was 8. I believed everything he said back then like it was gospel. My father is Rick Vance, the owner and founder of Vance & Co. Builders. He started as a common laborer at 19, took the reins of the company from his father, Arthur, at 31, and turned it into the biggest residential contractor in the entire county. My mother died when I was only 7 years old, ovarian cancer. She was only 34. After she was gone, the world felt very empty, and it was just me, my father, and my grandfather Arthur. Arthur was a man who always smelled like cedar wood shavings and kept a secret stash of butterscotch candies in his desk drawer just for me. Arthur was the one who truly held the business together. He was the one who ran the books, negotiated the high-stakes contracts, and trained the crews on the ground. My father, he was the muscle. He liked to swing the hammer and be the face of the brand, but Arthur built the actual structure. Every Sunday after church, Arthur would take me into his private study. The desk was solid, hand-built cedar with a green brass lamp and a glass paperweight shaped like a grizzly bear. He would sit me on his lap, let me hold the heavy company seal, and let me stamp the invoices. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small in your own family, Jordan," he told me once. I was 9 years old. I didn't understand the weight of those words then. That was before Cynthia arrived. My father met Cynthia Miller when I was 18, just 2 weeks before I was set to leave for college. She was a receptionist at the local dentist's office on Oak Street. She had a daughter named Tiffany from her first marriage who was 8 years old at the time. Cynthia was warm, attentive, and seemingly perfect. She brought my father home-cooked casseroles, asked him deep questions about his day, and laughed at every single one of his jokes. She made him feel seen and appreciated in a way he hadn't felt since my mother passed. I understood that. I didn't blame him for wanting to be happy again. But Cynthia's warmth had a very specific radius. It extended to my father, it extended to her daughter Tiffany, and it extended to the neighbors she wanted to impress with her perfect life. It definitely did not extend to me. Her smile would literally change the second my father walked out of the room. It wasn't a dramatic shift, it was subtle, like a lamp being switched to its lowest setting. "Jordan, honey," she said to me just 3 months after the wedding, "Tiffany really needs her own creative space for her hobbies. Would you mind if we moved your things to the basement guest room, since you're at college most of the time anyway?" Just like that, my childhood bedroom became Tiffany's craft room. My posters were taken down and thrown in boxes. Her butterfly stickers went up on the walls. The family photo on the mantle was the next thing to change. The one from my parents' wedding was replaced by a new one: Rick, Cynthia, Tiffany, and me at the county fair. Except in this photo, I was standing on the far right, half a step behind everyone else, almost out of the frame. By Christmas that year, my face was literally 3 inches from the edge of the frame. By the next Christmas, there was a brand new frame entirely, a professional studio portrait. Rick, Cynthia, and Tiffany in matching blue sweaters, looking like a Hallmark card. I was away at college when they took it. Nobody even called to tell me they were doing it. I found out when I walked into the house for winter break and saw it hanging prominently above the fireplace. I wanted to be a structural engineer. I had wanted that ever since that morning on Highway 9 when my father pointed at the steel beam. But when I asked my father to help me with the tuition for the engineering program, he sat at the kitchen table and rubbed the back of his neck like it was a burden. "Engineering, Geordie? That's a tough, expensive field for a girl. Cynthia thinks maybe you should consider a teaching degree. Steady hours, summers off, great benefits." I looked him in the eye. "Cynthia thinks." He just sighed and said, "We both think it's for the best." I didn't argue. I applied for every single scholarship I could find. I worked double shifts at a copy center. I eventually graduated with a degree in structural engineering from the State University with $37,000 in student loans and exactly $0 of help from my father. He showed up to the graduation ceremony, sitting in the 5th row with Cynthia and Tiffany. Tiffany played a game on Cynthia's phone the entire time. After it was over, my father gave me a quick hug and said, "Proud of you, Geordie. I knew you. Figure it out." They left before the reception because Cynthia had made reservations at a place that didn't allow for delays. Phone calls got shorter and shorter after that. I would call on Sunday afternoons, and he would talk for maybe 6 or 7 minutes before Cynthia would remind him about a show they were watching or an errand they had to run. Every semester, the calls got shorter. Every holiday, the excuses for why I wasn't included got longer. "Oh, Jordan, we thought you were staying at school this Thanksgiving. Tiffany has a big dance recital on Christmas Eve, so we're doing a private family dinner early this year." Did I not mention that? He always forgot to tell me, or someone made sure he forgot. My grandfather Arthur died on a rainy Tuesday in March. He was 79. He had a heart attack right at the cedar desk in his study. They found him with his reading glasses still on his face and a half-finished cup of coffee sitting next to that brass lamp. The funeral was huge, over 200 people. Arthur was the kind of man who remembered your kid's name and asked about your dog. The whole town showed up to pay respects. Cynthia, predictably, complained about the seating arrangements the entire morning. "I just think immediate family should be in the front pew, Rick. Not cousins, not old drinking buddies. Immediate family only." She meant herself and Tiffany. She very clearly did not mean me. My Aunt Sarah, my father's older sister, didn't say a word. She just took my arm and moved me to the front pew herself, staring Cynthia down. After the service, Arthur's longtime attorney pulled me aside. His name was Martin, a quiet man in a sharp suit who had represented my grandfather for 30 years. "Your grandfather left something very specific for you, Jordan," Martin said. 40% of Vance and co-builders held in a private trust. The trust vests the moment you turn 30. Until then, the shares are locked away. Your father knows the trust exists, but he's never looked into the specifics. Martin handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Arthur's shaky handwriting. It read, "Your father is a good man, but he has a very weak spine. This 40% is your seat at the table. Don't you dare give it up for anyone." I was 24. I had 6 years before any of it would even matter. I folded that letter, put it in my coat pocket, and walked past my grandfather's study on the way out. The cedar desk was still there. The brass lamp was still on. On my 30th birthday, I didn't have a party. I drove straight to Martin's office and signed the paperwork that made the trust official. 40% of Vance and co-builders was now legally mine. Not just on a piece of paper in a drawer, but mine in the state registry, the tax filings, and the LLC operating agreement. Martin walked me through the fine print. It was a 43-page document, drafted by Arthur and a specialist named Judith back in the late 90s. Arthur had paid her under the table to make sure it was airtight. My father had signed the agreement years ago without reading past the first few pages. Clause 7.3, Martin said, tapping the page with his pen. "This is the one your grandfather wanted to make sure you understood." I read it twice to be sure. Voluntary relinquishment by any member triggers a mandatory buyback at an independently appraised fair market value. Remaining members must complete the buyback within 90 calendar days or forfeit all operational control to a court-appointed trustee. Martin leaned back in his chair. "Your grandfather wrote that clause specifically to protect you from being pushed out. If you ever chose to leave the company, they would be forced to pay you the full, fair value for your shares. They can't just absorb them or ignore you. And if they can't come up with the cash in 90 days, the entire company restructures under court supervision. Your father would lose day-to-day control of everything." I sat with that for a long time. The office was quiet, with only the hum of traffic from the street below. "I hope I never need this," I said. Martin just nodded. Arthur hoped the same thing. I filed that agreement in a fireproof box in my closet. 2 years passed. I worked my tail off designing bridges, parking garages, and hospital wings. I paid off every cent of my student loans. I bought a condo 45 minutes away from the family home. I didn't think about Clause 7.3. I didn't want to. I tried, and I want that on the record. I tried for 2 years to be part of that business. When I turned 30, I emailed my father directly. "Dad, I'd like to discuss my actual role in the company and the future of the legacy." He replied 4 days later, "Sure, Jordy, let's talk soon." Soon never came. I called Cynthia and proposed a big family dinner to catch up. "Rick has been so incredibly stressed lately," she said. "Maybe next month." Next month turned into the month after that, which eventually turned into total silence. I invited my father to lunch 3 times. He canceled the first one at the last minute. He completely forgot the second one. The third time, he showed up 20 minutes late, ate half a sandwich while looking at his watch, and left the moment Cynthia texted him that Tiffany needed a ride to practice. 14 minutes. That was the longest conversation I had with my father in 2 years. I eventually sent a formal letter, not a legal threat, just a clear request. I outlined my position in the company as a 40% owner. I asked for quarterly meetings and to be included in the financial reviews. I sent it via email and certified mail. My father didn't even call me. He just forwarded the email to Cynthia. Cynthia called me the very next day, sounding offended. "Jordan, why on earth are you creating all this drama? Can't you see your father is finally happy? He doesn't need this kind of corporate stress. If you want to be part of this family, just show up to the holidays and be pleasant." "I am trying to show up, Cynthia," I told her, my voice shaking. "But nobody ever answers the door." She hung up on me. 14 emails, 3 voicemails, 2 certified letters, 0 responses, 0 meetings, 0 acknowledgement that I owned nearly half of the company that was currently paying my father's mortgage, funding Tiffany's new car, and keeping the lights on at 27 different job sites across the county. The text came on a Wednesday from my father, which was rare. He usually let Cynthia handle the typing. "Father's Day dinner, Sunday the 15th, 6 p.m. sharp. Be there." "The whole family, Dad," I replied. I read his yes 3 times. My father hadn't personally invited me to a single event in over a year. I called my Aunt Sarah immediately. "He's planning something big," Sarah told me. "Cynthia has been organizing this for weeks. New silk tablecloths, expensive candles, the works. She even hired a professional photographer to come by after dessert." A photographer for a Father's Day dinner. "Honey, I don't know what they're up to, but it's definitely not just dinner," Sarah warned. I hung up and sat on my couch, staring at the fireproof box in my closet. I had a feeling in my chest, a slow, heavy, sinking feeling. It was the same feeling you get right before a structural beam fails a stress test. You know the load is too much, even if you haven't heard the metal crack yet. I called Martin. "Martin, if I ever decide to actually exercise Clause 7.3, the voluntary relinquishment, how fast can you have the paperwork ready?" There was a long pause on the other end. "I can have everything drafted, double-checked, and ready for your signature by Thursday noon." "Thursday of this week." "Thursday of this week," he confirmed. I looked at the calendar on my kitchen wall. Today was Wednesday. The dinner was Sunday. Thursday was tomorrow. "Draft it," I said. "I'm not saying I'll sign it, I want it ready." "Understood, Jordan. I'll have it on my desk by lunch tomorrow." I hung up, took a long shower, made a lonely dinner, and sat at my small table eating pasta by myself, the same way I had eaten dinner almost every single night for the last 14 years. Thursday works, I thought. Thursday works. Thursday came and went. Martin's paperwork sat in a thick manila folder on his desk. I didn't go in. I didn't sign it. Not yet. I wanted to give him one last chance. Friday, I drove over to my father's house. Aunt Sarah had asked for help setting up some decorations, and Cynthia had insisted that the whole family pitch in. In Cynthia speak, that meant she needed a laborer to carry heavy folding chairs from the garage and hang banners. The house smelled like industrial lemon cleaner and Cynthia's cloying perfume. Tiffany was in the living room, lounging on the sofa and talking loudly on her phone. She didn't even look up or acknowledge me when I walked past her with a stack of chairs. In the formal dining room, the table was already set for 25 people. Name cards were at every single seat. I walked around the table, looking for mine. I eventually found it at the very far end, tucked between a second cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years and an empty chair for a plus one that didn't exist. My father's seat was at the head of the table. Tiffany's name card was directly to his right. Cynthia was to his left. I carried the chairs. I hung the Happy Father's Day banner. I said absolutely nothing. But as I walked past the kitchen island, I saw it. A brand new picture frame, gold-edged and ornate, the kind of frame you buy when you want people to notice what's inside. It was currently empty, but a small white placeholder card inside read, "Certificate of Adoption, State of North Carolina." Then I heard Tiffany's voice from the next room. She was laughing. "I know, I am so stoked. It's finally going to be official. I'm finally a Vance." On the counter right behind the frame was an official envelope from the county courthouse. The return address was unmistakable. "In the matter of adult adoption, petition filed." I set the last folding chair against the wall. I picked up my car keys. I drove the 45 minutes back to my condo without even turning on the radio. Saturday morning, I stopped by Aunt Sarah's house. She lives in a little yellow ranch on Birch Lane, just 4 blocks away from my father. She's lived there since before I was even born. We sat at her kitchen table with mugs of black coffee. She pushed a plate of homemade cinnamon rolls toward me, but she wouldn't look me in the eye. "Jordan, I need to show you something," she said softly. She went into the hallway and came back with a photograph. It was a brand new family portrait, Rick, Cynthia, and Tiffany. It was taken at a professional studio. They had matching outfits, professional lighting, and perfect smiles. It was the same photo I had seen earlier, but this was a large print. I wasn't in it. There was no gap where I should have stood. There was no empty space. It was a complete unit of 3. "When was this taken?" I asked, my voice flat. "March. I think Cynthia posted it on her Facebook page," Sarah said, stirring her coffee nervously. I stared at the photo for a long time. A family unit. Complete. I asked your father about it, Sarah added. He told me that you preferred not to be in family photos anymore. He said you were too busy with your big city job to bother with them. I never said that, Aunt Sarah. He never even called me. I know you didn't, honey. We sat in silence for a while. The clock above her stove ticked loudly. Outside, a neighbor's lawn mower droned on. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Jordan, what are you going to do at that dinner tomorrow? I don't know yet, I lied. That wasn't entirely true. Martin's paperwork was waiting. The pen was ready. But a small, stupid part of me still wanted to be wrong. I wanted to walk into that dinner and have my father look at me, really look at me, and say something that proved he still knew I was his daughter. I'm going to the dinner, I said, and I'm going to see what happens. Sarah squeezed my hand and didn't let go for a long time. 2 weeks before this Father's Day mess, my cousin Nathan had hosted a casual barbecue at his place. Burgers, horseshoes, kids running through the sprinklers. I had arrived late, parked my car behind Nathan's truck, and walked around the side of the house toward the backyard. The gate was hanging open. I could hear the music and the loud voices of my family. Tiffany was standing near the grill with 3 of our cousins. She was holding a soda, talking fast and loud the way she does when she's the center of attention. I was about 10 feet away, hidden by the corner of the house, close enough to hear every single word. It's going to be official, Tiffany squealed. Rick is adopting me legally, like for real. Cynthia already filed the paperwork and everything. My cousin Claire said something I couldn't quite catch, likely asking about me. Tiffany just shrugged dismissively. I mean, Jordan, she was never really part of this family anyway. She barely ever comes around, she doesn't work for the company, and she basically acts like she's too good for us. She's an outsider. I stopped walking. My heart felt like it had been dropped into a bucket of ice. Tiffany looked up and saw me standing there. She didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't apologize. She held my gaze for 2 full seconds with a look of pure triumph, and then she just shrugged again. I mean, it's true, though. Cousin Nathan coughed awkwardly. Claire looked at the ground. Nobody said a word in my defense. I looked at the empty paper plate in my hand. I hadn't even put food on it yet. I turned around, walked back to my car, and left. Tiffany didn't call after me. Nobody did for about 30 seconds until I heard Nathan say, Tiffany, that was way out of line. And Tiffany's response, what? Everyone knows it's the truth. I sat in my car, hands gripped onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2. The engine was off. She was never really part of this family anyway. I drove home. I called Martin. What time can I come in on Friday? The following Tuesday, I went to my father's office at the Vance & Co. compound on Industrial Drive. I had some quarterly tax documents that legally required his signature as the majority operator. It was a chore I did twice a year, and usually the only reason I ever stepped foot in that building. The front desk was empty because the receptionist was on her lunch break. I walked down the familiar hallway toward my father's private office. The door was wide open. There on his desk, right next to his coffee mug and a stack of pending invoices, sat the framed certificate. Gold frame, elegant calligraphy on cream paper. Certificate of Adoption, State of North Carolina. It had Tiffany's full name, my father's full name, a line for the judge, and a line for my father's signature. Tiffany had already signed her part. Her signature was big and loopy. Next to the certificate was that yellow legal pad. In my father's jagged handwriting was the draft of the speech he planned to give tonight. I knew I shouldn't read it, but I couldn't stop myself. Family means everything to me, it began. And today, on this Father's Day, I want to tell all of you that I am finally making it official. I am legally adopting Tiffany Elizabeth Mitchell as my daughter. She has brought light back into my life, a sense of purpose into my home, and joy into every single day. After all these years, I finally have the daughter I always deserved. I read that last sentence twice. The daughter I always deserved. I didn't leave the tax papers. I didn't say hello. I just turned around, walked out of the building, and drove straight to the one place where I knew I actually had a seat at the table. I counted the words in his speech, 47 words total. Tiffany's name appeared twice in those notes. My name, it appeared exactly 0 times. I stood there in his office, the silence ringing in my ears, and set the quarterly paperwork on the corner of the desk near the door. I didn't leave a sticky note. I didn't leave a "love you, Dad." I just walked out of that building, past the break room where I used to hide and do my homework, and out past the fleet of white Ford trucks with Vance and Co. builders, stenciled on the doors in bold blue letters. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I just stared at the steering wheel, waiting for my hands to stop shaking before I could even trust myself to start the engine. By Wednesday evening, I was back in my condo, sitting on my couch with a bowl of tomato soup that had gone cold an hour ago. The television was on, but I'd muted it. It was some mindless home renovation show, a couple arguing over whether to use subway tile or herringbone in a kitchen they didn't deserve. I watched them bicker, then eventually hug it out. I picked up my phone and called Martin. "The paperwork we discussed on Thursday," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "Is it ready?" "Ready to sign whenever you are, Jordan," Martin replied instantly. "I can have a notary in the office any day this week. Just give me the word." I looked back at the TV. The couple had stopped arguing. They were hugging. They'd settled on a boring beige tile. They looked happy. "Martin, if I sign this on Friday, the dinner is Sunday. Is there a way to hold the filing, in case I change my mind?" "I can hold the executed documents for 48 hours before I submit them to the state," Martin explained. "Think of it as a cooling-off period. If you want to cancel within that window, you call me, and I shred the whole thing right in front of you. No filing, no record, no legal consequences. But if I don't hear from you by Monday morning at 9:00 a.m., I file. The 90-day clock starts ticking. Your father will receive formal legal notice about 7 to 10 business days after that." I stared into my soup. A thin film had formed on the surface. It looked gray under the kitchen lights. "Friday at 2 p.m., I told him. "I'll be there." I hung up and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. I wanted to be wrong so badly. I wanted to walk into that Sunday dinner and have my father look at me, truly look at me the way he did when I was 8 years old on that Highway 9 construction site, and say just one thing that proved I still mattered. One sentence. One look. One fleeting moment of recognition. If he gave me that, I'd call Martin, and this whole legal nightmare would vanish like it never happened. Friday afternoon arrived, just 48 hours before the big Father's Day event. Aunt Sarah had asked me to come by the house one last time to help with the final prep. There were centerpieces to arrange, chairs to recount, and a massive dessert table that needed to be staged in the living room. I didn't want to go. Every fiber of my being told me to stay home and lock the door, but Sarah asked. And Sarah was the only person in that entire family who still looked at me like I was a whole human being and not just a ghost haunting the hallways. Cynthia was in the backyard, acting like a drill sergeant while directing 2 of Tiffany's friends who were hanging string lights from the trees. My father was still at the office, likely finishing up his big project. Tiffany was upstairs, getting ready for something she claimed was top secret. I was alone in the kitchen, folding napkins into intricate fans exactly the way Cynthia had demonstrated, because God forbid a napkin was folded incorrectly in her house. Her iPhone was sitting on the granite counter, face up, plugged into a fast charger. It buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't trying to be a snoop, but the name at the top of the notification caught my eye. The Vance family. It was a group chat. I looked at the participants, Rick, Cynthia, and Tiffany. I wasn't in it. I had never been invited to it. The message on the screen was from Cynthia, sent about 40 minutes ago. It read, "After Sunday, we reclassify her shares as dormant. I talked to the accountant Monday. It's all set." Then my father's reply popped up underneath. "She won't even notice. She never comes to the board meetings anyway." And then the final blow from Tiffany. "Can we change the locks on the main office too? LOL." I stood perfectly still. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic drip of the kitchen faucet. Outside, I heard one of Tiffany's friends let out a loud, shrill laugh. I felt a coldness wash over me that I can't even describe. I picked up Cynthia's phone. I took 3 clear screenshots of the conversation. I sent them to my own number, and then I meticulously deleted the sent messages from her text log so she'd never know I'd seen them. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, face down this time, and plugged it back into the charger. I walked down the hallway and stopped in front of Grandpa Arthur's old study. The cedar desk was still there, looking as majestic as ever. The same brass lamp, the same glass grizzly bear paperweight. My father used the room now, but he hadn't changed a single thing about it. I placed my hand on the wood. It was warm from the afternoon sun streaming through the window. 6 years of holding my tongue. 14 years of being patient. And they were planning to erase me from the company ledger the exact same week they were planning to erase me from the family tree. I took my hand off the desk. I didn't say goodbye. I drove straight to Martin's office. I walked in and I signed every single page. If you have ever sat at a family table and realized that nobody was ever going to fight for your seat, that your empty chair was already being filled before you even walked out the door, then you know exactly what this feels like. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to go nuclear to protect yourself. Tell me your story, and if this one is hitting home, stay with me, because what happens on Sunday is a total train wreck that none of them saw coming. The notary was a woman named Patricia. She had short, sensible gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a silver chain around her neck. She didn't try to make small talk, which I appreciated. I sat in Martin's office at exactly 2:14 p.m. on a Friday and signed my name on 3 high-stakes documents. The voluntary relinquishment of my 40% stake in Vance and Co-Builders, LLC, the formal request for an independent appraisal of the company's assets, and the official notification to the remaining members. Martin watched me sign each one. He didn't rush me. He didn't ask if I was sure. When I was finished, he gathered the papers, slid them into a professional blue folder, and locked them in his desk drawer. Once I file these on Monday morning, the 90-day clock starts, Martin said firmly. The independent appraiser will come in and assess the fair market value. Based on the most recent revenue figures I've seen, your 40% is worth approximately $3.2 million. I felt my breath hitch. $3.2 million. That was the price tag on 14 years of being ignored. And if they can't pay that within 90 days, I asked. Then they forfeit operational control, Martin said. The LLC restructures under court supervision. Your father would effectively become an employee of his own company, answering to a trustee. I nodded. I drove home, walking past my closet where the fireproof box held Arthur's original handwritten notes. I opened the folder one last time. Next to the legal documents was a yellowed copy of the agreement with Arthur's handwriting in the margin. The table always has a seat for you, sweetheart. I closed the folder. Sunday morning arrived. Father's Day. I woke up at 6:37 a.m. The light coming through my bedroom window was a pale, icy blue, the kind of light that makes the world feel quieter than it actually is. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. I thought about calling Martin. I thought about telling him to shred it all. I could still put on some jeans, drive to my dad's house with a nice bottle of bourbon and a card that said Happy Father's Day in my best handwriting. I could still choose to be the pleasant daughter Cynthia wanted me to be. The window was still open. The ink hadn't become permanent yet. I got up. I showered. I stood in front of my closet for 11 minutes just staring at my clothes. I chose a simple navy blue dress with a thin leather belt. Navy was Arthur's favorite color. He wore a navy tie to church every single Sunday. I put on the earrings my mother used to wear, small gold hoops with a tiny, deep blue sapphire. They had been sitting in a velvet box on her dresser the day she died. Aunt Sarah had saved them for me all those years. I called Sarah. I'll be there, I said. You don't have to do this, Jordan, she whispered. I know, I replied. I looked at my phone. Martin's number was right there in my recent calls. I could stop the world from ending with one 30-second phone call. I put the phone in my purse. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to cry or scream. I wasn't going to stand up and give a dramatic speech about betrayal or injustice or the 14 years I spent being cropped out of photos. I was going to sit down, eat my dinner, and watch my father make his final choice in front of 25 people who shared his last name. And then I was going to go home. Whatever happened after that was just basic arithmetic. I pulled into the driveway at 5:52 p.m. Maple Lane was lined with cars. I saw Uncle Mike's Buick, Cousin Nathan's truck, and Aunt Sarah's gray sedan. There was a fleet of white SUVs I didn't recognize, Cynthia's side of the family, no doubt. The house was glowing, every light turned on. Through the front window, I could see people moving around, passing appetizers, and Cynthia adjusting the placement of a centerpiece. A massive banner over the fireplace read, "Happy Father's Day," in sparkling gold letters. I sat in my car for 2 minutes. I checked my makeup in the visor mirror, smoothed out the skirt of my dress, and touched my mother's earrings for luck. Then I got out and walked to the front door. Inside, it was a wall of noise and heat. 25 people crammed into a house built for 12. There were cousins I only saw once a year at funerals and aunts who pinched my cheeks and told me I looked tired. Cynthia's mother, a woman who had never bothered to learn my name, greeted me at the kitchen door. "Oh, Jordan," Cynthia said, appearing out of the crowd. "You actually made it. How nice." She did that fake air kiss near my cheek. Her perfume was overwhelming, too sweet, like rotting flowers. Her smile was sharp and practiced. I looked for my father. He was in the living room, standing by the fireplace with Tiffany, showing her something on his phone. They were both laughing. He saw me, gave a half-hearted wave, and said, "Hey, Jordy." Then he immediately turned back to Tiffany. I found my seat at the table. It was at the very end of the row, shoved between Cousin Derek, who I hadn't spoken to since Grandpa Arthur's funeral, and an empty chair. No one had bothered to save me a spot near the important end of the table. Aunt Sarah appeared beside me and squeezed my hand under the table. She didn't say anything, but her grip told me everything. At 7:15 p.m., my father tapped his wine glass with a silver fork. The room went silent. Cynthia stood up first, walking over to the light switch to dim the overheads. The candles on the long table flared up, casting long, dramatic shadows against the walls. It looked choreographed because it was. "Everyone," Cynthia said. Her voice filled with that rehearsed warmth that sounds like love if you aren't listening closely. "Rick has something very special he would like to share with us all tonight." She turned to Tiffany and whispered, "Ready, sweetheart." Tiffany nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. I looked past my father and saw it. Behind his chair, propped up on a small wooden easel, was that gold-rimmed frame, the certificate of adoption. The calligraphy seemed to glow in the candlelight. Next to the easel stood a woman I didn't recognize, Cynthia's friend, a professional photographer. She was already framing the shot, her long lens pointed directly at my father. This wasn't a dinner, it was a production. Cynthia caught me looking at the easel. Our eyes locked across the room. She didn't give me her polite smile or her public smile. She gave me the victory smile. The look of someone who had already won the war and just wanted to see the look on my face when the final blow landed. Aunt Sarah leaned toward me, her voice a whisper. "Jordan, what is happening?" I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "You'll see," I said. My father stood at the head of the table. He held a glass of expensive red wine in one hand and adjusted his collar with the other. He cleared his throat, and 25 sets of eyes turned toward him. I folded my hands in my lap. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands remained perfectly still. "Family," my father began, lifting his glass high. "Family means everything to me." He paused for dramatic effect. Cynthia nodded encouragingly. Tiffany clasped her hands together over her heart. "When I lost my first wife," he continued, "God rest her soul, I thought I would never find that kind of happiness again. But then Cynthia walked into my life and everything changed." He looked at Cynthia and she pressed a hand to her chest, acting surprised. "And Tiffany, my little Tiff, from the moment you walked into this house, you brought light. You brought a sense of purpose. You brought joy into every single day of my life." Tiffany wiped a stray tear from her eye. Several of my aunts started reaching for their napkins. He talked for 4 minutes. I counted every second. He talked about Cynthia's amazing support. He talked about Tiffany's accomplishments. He talked about what it meant to build a family from the ground up. He said Tiffany's name 11 times. He didn't mention me once, not even as a passing thought, not a my daughters or my kids or even a everyone here. He spoke as if I didn't exist in that room or in his history. It was as if the 8-year-old girl on the plywood stack had been a rough draft he'd eventually decided to delete. I watched his face. I watched the way he leaned toward Tiffany like a plant leaning toward the sun. I watched the room. People were smiling, crying, nodding along. 2 of my cousins glanced over at me with looks that were a mix of pity and pure discomfort. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just watched. Aunt Sarah was rigid next to me. I could feel the vibration of her anger through the table. My father set down his glass and reached behind his chair. He lifted the framed certificate from the easel and held it out with both hands. The gold frame glinted like a weapon in the candlelight. The photographer raised her camera. "Today," my father said, his voice booming with pride, "I want to make something official." He turned to Tiffany. "Tiffany Elizabeth Miller, I am legally adopting you as my daughter." The room erupted. Cynthia burst into tears. Tiffany threw her arms around my father's neck. Cousins were gasping and clapping. Cynthia's mother shouted, "Praise the Lord!" The photographer fired off a dozen shots. Flash, flash, flash. My father held Tiffany at arm's length and looked out at the room, his chin trembling and his eyes wet with tears. "I finally have the daughter I always deserved," he said. Applause, hugs, glasses raised in a toast. Cynthia dabbed her eyes with a silk napkin and mouthed, "I love you" to Rick. Tiffany was laughing and crying at the same time. 2 of Cynthia's sisters stood up to embrace her. I sat at the very end of the table. Nobody looked at me, not because they were being intentionally cruel, but because in that moment I simply did not matter. I wasn't a character in the story my father was telling. I wasn't even a footnote. I was just the empty space between Derek and the wall. Aunt Sarah grabbed my forearm, her grip almost painful. "Jordan, honey." "It's fine, Aunt Sarah," I said. It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. But the word left my mouth with the cold precision of a structural calculation. Measured, precise, stripped of anything that didn't serve the load. For the next 45 minutes, the room orbited around my father and Tiffany like planets around a sun. People lined up to congratulate them. Cynthia stood by Rick's side, accepting praise as if she'd just brokered a world peace treaty. "What a beautiful gesture, Rick," someone said. "Tiffany is so lucky to have a man like you. This is what family is all about." Cousin Claire came to my end of the table and sat in the empty chair. "Are you okay, Jordan?" she asked softly. "I appreciate you asking, Claire," I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't know how. I ate my food. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes that definitely came from a box despite Cynthia's claims. I ate methodically because it gave my hands something to do. I didn't leave early. I didn't push back my chair. I didn't say any of the 17 things that were lining up behind my teeth. Cynthia approached me during dessert. She pulled a chair close, her knees pointed right at me. She smelled like vanilla and victory. "Jordan, I really hope you understand," she said, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "This isn't about you." I looked her dead in the eye. "I understand completely, Cynthia." "Good," she said, patting my arm, "because we're all family here." She stood up and walked back to Rick. "Not about me. After 14 years of being pushed to the edge of every frame, excluded from every plan, and forgotten on every holiday, she was telling me it wasn't about me. She was right, in a way. It was never about me. That was the whole problem. During the dessert rush, I quietly excused myself. Nobody noticed I was gone. The room was still buzzing with the adoption glow. Cynthia was passing around a tray of Tiffany's favorite lemon bars. I walked down the quiet hall to Grandpa Arthur's study. The door was half open. The room was dark except for the glow of the porch light through the window. The cedar desk was right where it always was. I opened the top right drawer. Beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found the manila folder. I pulled out Arthur's original copy of the operating agreement. 43 pages, yellowed with age. I turned to page 27, clause 7.3. Arthur had underlined it in thick blue ink. In the margin, he had written, "Rick signed without reading. Keep this copy safe." I read the clause one last time. Voluntary relinquishment by any member triggers a mandatory buyback. In the dining room, I heard Cynthia laugh. I heard my father's deep voice. I heard the camera click again. "Grandpa," I whispered to the shadows. "I tried. I really, really tried." I took a clear photo of the clause with my phone, tucked the folder back into the drawer, and closed it gently. I went back to the table and finished my lemon bar. I even helped clear the dishes. I stacked the plates by the sink, wiped the counters, and wrapped the leftover chicken in foil. Cynthia didn't thank me. She was too busy in the living room, helping Rick hang the framed adoption certificate on the mantel, in the exact spot where my college graduation photo used to hang. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Rick tapped a small nail into the wall with a hammer. They stepped back to admire it, and Tiffany took a photo for her Instagram. I looked at my watch. The 48-hour window was closed. My phone stayed in my purse. The 90-day clock had officially started. The adoption certificate looked like it had always been there, glowing on the mantel as if the wall itself had been waiting for that one final piece to complete the lie. I stood at the sink, methodically drying my hands on a checkered dish towel, and found Aunt Sarah standing in the hallway, watching me with eyes full of sorrow. "I'm leaving, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't say anything at first. She just pulled me into a hug, a real one. The kind of hug where you can actually feel the other person's heartbeat against your own. "What are you going to do, Jordan?" she asked as she pulled away. "What I should have done 2 years ago," I replied. Sarah didn't ask for a translation. I think, deep down, she already knew the storm was coming. I walked back into the living room to say my goodbyes. My father was buried in his oversized leather recliner, with Tiffany perched right on the armrest next to him. They were huddled together, scrolling through the photos from the evening on her phone, laughing at some inside joke. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," I said, standing at the edge of the rug. He didn't even look up at first. "Thanks, Jordy. Drive safe out there. Watch for deer." He didn't stand up. He didn't walk me to the door. He didn't even offer a real goodbye. He just turned back to Tiffany's screen and pointed at a blurry shot of the cake. "Make sure you send that one to Uncle Mike," he muttered. I walked out the front door, and for the first time in 14 years, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt cold, crisp, and clean. I sat in my car for a long moment, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of a neighbor's party. The 48-hour window was technically still open, but I already knew with every fiber of my soul that I wouldn't be making that call. Monday morning, 9 a.m. I was sitting at my desk on the 4th floor of my engineering firm, a place where I design things that are actually built to hold weight. I picked up the phone and dialed Martin's direct line. "File it," I said the second he picked up. "Jordan, are you absolutely sure?" Martin asked, his voice cautious. "The 48-hour window doesn't officially expire until 2:14 p.m. this afternoon. You still have time to." "Martin, file it now." There was a brief, heavy pause on the line. "Understood. Filing with the state registry as we speak." I hung up the phone and immediately went back to work. I opened my laptop and pulled up the blueprints for a new hospital wing in Greensboro. I spent the next 4 hours calculating the load-bearing requirements for a pediatric unit and double-checking the steel reinforcement specs for a third-floor corridor. Business as usual. My work didn't care about my father's speech. The steel beams didn't care about adoption certificates, lemon bars, or framed photos on a mantel. The numbers were clean, the numbers were honest, and most importantly, the numbers held. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Cynthia. "Hi, Jordan. Tiffany is interested in taking on more responsibility at Vance, and your father thinks she could use your old office since you rarely come in anyway. Can you clear your stuff out by Friday? Thanks." I read it twice. My office. The small room right next to my father's where Grandpa Arthur used to keep the master project files. The room where I used to sit on his lap and stamp invoices on Sunday mornings. They wanted to hand it over to Tiffany the very week after the adoption, the same month they planned to reclassify my shares and erase my existence. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The legal notice would arrive at my father's business address in 7 to 10 days. It would be a plain white envelope with Martin's law firm in the return address. It would be addressed to Richard A. Vance, managing member. 9 days later, my phone rang while I was reviewing connection details for a parking garage. The caller ID simply said, "Dad." He hadn't called me directly, without Cynthia's prompting, in over 7 months. I answered. "Jordan." His voice was shaking. It wasn't anger, at least not yet. It was something much rarer for him, pure, unadulterated disbelief. "What is this? What the hell did you do?" "I exercised my rights under the operating agreement, Dad," I said calmly. "You what? What are you talking about? This letter. It says you're relinquishing your shares. It says the company owes you $3.2 million. Have you lost your mind?" "I'm exercising Clause 7.3, I replied, my voice as steady as a structural pillar. "Voluntary relinquishment with a mandatory buyback at appraised fair market value. You should have read the contract Grandpa Arthur had you sign." "This is my business," he roared. "I built this for the family." "Grandpa built it for the family, Dad. You just decided who got to count as family." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear him breathing heavily, and I could hear Cynthia's sharp, panicked voice in the background asking what the letter said. "We need to talk about this," my father finally said, his tone shifting to a desperate command. "Come to the house. Sit down with me and Cynthia. We'll sort this out as a family." "My attorney will be in touch, Dad. This is a legal matter now." "Jordan, don't do this. Think about what you're doing to this family." "I have," I said. "For 14 years. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up, set the phone face down on my desk, and went back to the parking structure blueprints. The connection details were perfect. The load paths were sound. Everything I built was designed to stay standing, even when the ground shifted. My father called an emergency family meeting for the following Saturday. Same house, same dining room, same table where, just 9 days prior, he had told 25 people that Tiffany was the daughter he'd always deserved. This time the room was mostly empty. There were only 7 of us: my father, Cynthia, Tiffany, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Mike, my attorney Carla, and me. I arrived at 2:00 p.m. sharp. Carla was already waiting in her car, dressed in a sharp gray power suit. She didn't smile. This wasn't a social call. We walked in together. The house felt different. The Happy Father's Day banner was gone. The balloons had deflated. But the adoption certificate was still there, looming over us from the mantel. My father was standing at the head of the table, his face a deep, mottled red. Cynthia sat to his left, her knuckles white as she gripped a coffee mug. Tiffany sat across from her, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Tell me this is a bluff," my father spat the moment I sat down. "Tell me you aren't actually trying to bankrupt me." "It's not a bluff, Dad." Cynthia leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "How could you do this to your father, after every single thing he's given you over the years?" I let that question hang in the air for 3 full seconds. I wanted her to feel the weight of it. "What exactly has he given me, Cynthia? Name one thing." Cynthia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My father slammed his palm against the mahogany table so hard the coffee mugs rattled. "I built this business with my bare hands. I poured the concrete, I hung the drywall, I worked 70-hour weeks for 30 years. Grandpa built this business," I corrected him. My voice was level. "And he left 40% of it to me. I have now voluntarily relinquished that stake. Per the operating agreement, you have 90 days to buy me out at fair market value. This isn't a negotiation, Dad. It's the contract you signed in 1999. Cynthia turned to my father, her voice rising. "Do something, Rick. She can't just walk in here and—" "Mr. Vance," Carla interrupted, opening her manila folder with professional precision. "Clause 7.3 of the Vance and Co-Builders Operating Agreement was drafted by Judith Greenwald on behalf of Arthur Vance. It is ironclad." She read the clause aloud, word for word. The room went dead silent. Cynthia tried to pivot. I watched the dimmer switch happen in real time. Her posture softened, and her voice dropped an octave into that fake, nurturing tone. "Jordan, sweetie, we're family. Surely we can work this out without lawyers and folders. This isn't how families solve problems." "You had 14 years to solve this without lawyers, Cynthia," I said. Cynthia's composure finally cracked. It wasn't rage, it was something else. Her voice broke as she looked at Tiffany. "I just wanted my daughter to have a real family. That's all I ever wanted. I just wanted us to be whole." I looked at her, and for one split second, I saw the truth. She wasn't just a strategist. She was a woman who had been abandoned by Tiffany's biological father and had spent every waking second of the last decade making sure that would never happen again. She built a wall to protect her own child, and she didn't care that the wall was crushing me on the other side. I felt a flicker of empathy, the understanding that fear makes people do terrible things. But then I looked up at the mantel. I saw the adoption certificate sitting exactly where my graduation photo used to be. The flicker went out. My father looked at me, his jaw tight. "This is really what you want, Jordan, to destroy everything I've built." "You destroyed what Grandpa built the moment you decided to phase me out, Dad." I saw the group chat. The room went icy. Cynthia turned ghostly white. Tiffany stopped crying and stared at the table. "I saw every single message," I said, my voice as calm as a blueprint. "Reclassify her shares as dormant. Talk to the accountant Monday. Change the locks on the office." You were planning to steal my inheritance while I was sitting in the next room folding napkins for your party. My father looked at Cynthia. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "We didn't mean. It was just talk, Jordan," he stammered. "You said Tiffany's name 11 times in your speech, Dad. Mine, 0. You invited 25 people to watch you announce that Tiffany was your real daughter. You told everyone you finally had the daughter you deserved. Do you have any idea how that felt?" He flinched. I watched the realization hit him like a stress fracture through a concrete foundation. Slow, invisible, and then all at once. I didn't mean it like that," he whispered, covering his mouth with his hand. Tiffany started sobbing again. "This isn't fair. You're ruining everything." I looked directly at her. "You told our cousins I was never really part of the family at the barbecue. You looked me in the eye and told me it was the truth. Well, Tiffany, I'm finally choosing to agree with you. I'm no longer part of this family, and the operating agreement has a very specific price for that exit." Aunt Sarah stood up then. She'd been silent the whole time, but her face was set in stone. "Rick," she said, her voice quiet but echoing in the room, "I told you this would happen. 3 years ago in this very kitchen, I told you that you were losing your daughter. You told me I was overreacting." My father shook his head. "Sarah, please. Harold would be so ashamed of this." "Not of Jordan," Sarah snapped, her voice finally rising. "He'd be ashamed of you. You let this woman airbrush your own flesh and blood out of your life for 14 years. I said nothing for too long, Rick. I won't be silent anymore." Uncle Mike, who hadn't said a word, finally leaned forward. "Rick, just pay the girl what she's owed and apologize. You've earned this." My father looked like a broken man. $3.2 million. Where am I supposed to find that kind of cash in 90 days? Nobody answered. The adoption certificate watched from the mantel like a silent judge. I stood up and slung my purse over my shoulder. "Dad, I gave you 14 years of chances," I said. "I gave you emails, phone calls, and certified letters. I even gave you that dinner. I sat at that table last Sunday and watched you choose. I didn't say a word. I gave you every opportunity to be a father, and you chose to be a character in Cynthia's play." He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Smaller than the man who once pointed at a steel beam and told me I was the spine of the world. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is just arithmetic. 40% of an $8 million company is $3.2 million. That's not a punishment. It's just a fact." I turned toward the door. "If you walk out that door, Jordan," Cynthia called out, her voice desperate, "you are never welcome in this house again." I stopped. I didn't look at Cynthia, I looked at my father. I wanted to see if he would object, if he would hesitate, if he would finally stand up for me. He didn't. He just stared at his hands. I'm not asking for permission, Cynthia, I said. I'm informing you of the situation. I walked out into the bright Saturday sunlight. Carla followed me to the car. Are you okay? She asked as we buckled in. I looked back at the house on Maple Lane, the porch where I'd sat with Grandpa Arthur, the driveway where I learned to ride a bike. The window of the room that used to be mine before it was a craft studio. No, I said, but I will be. 3 weeks later, my father's high-priced attorney confirmed that Clause 7.3 was ironclad. There was no loophole. My father had to take out a massive loan against the business, securing it with his equipment and the property itself. Cynthia had to co-sign, and for the first time in their marriage, they started fighting. Loudly. The walls in a small town are thin. Everyone in the county knew within a month that Rick Vance was paying a $3 million stupid tax for trying to freeze out his own daughter. Tiffany's new role at the company was scrapped immediately. There was no budget for a creative director when the company was struggling to make interest payments. A month after the meeting, I received the first installment check for $1 million. I deposited it and opened a high-yield investment account. That Saturday, Aunt Sarah drove to my condo with a homemade casserole, Grandpa Arthur's secret recipe. He would be so proud of you, Jordan, she said as we ate. I don't know about that, I replied. I do, she said firmly. We didn't talk about Rick, or the adoption, or the certificate on the mantle. We just talked about life. My cousin Nathan called me later that week to tell me my dad was telling everyone I robbed him. He can tell people whatever he needs to feel better, Nathan, I said. For what it's worth, Nathan replied. Most of us know the real story. We saw how you were treated. I went back to my blueprints. The hospital wing was ahead of schedule. I didn't win in the traditional sense. There is no winning when your father chooses someone else over you. There is no winning when the man who taught you about structural integrity is the same man who collapses your foundation. But I learned the lesson Grandpa Arthur was trying to teach me all those years ago at that cedar desk. Your seat at the table isn't a gift that someone else gives you. It's something you build with your own 2 hands. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand up and walk away from a table where your plate was never set in the first place. That's my story. 14 years of silence, 1 legal clause nobody bothered to read, and a Father's Day dinner that changed the math forever. If this story reminded you to know your worth, share it. Subscribe for more real Reddit revenge, and I'll see you in the next one.